There have been heightened tensions over Greenland of late. It took an even more tenuous turn this week after the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot suggested that France could send troops to guard Greenland. This bold claim came in the wake of a reportedly heated phone call between US President Donald Trump and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. The phone call itself stemmed from Trump's interest in purchasing Greenland from Denmark. That's an idea that Frederiksen has dismissed as absurd. Trump's frustration over Denmark's refusal to even entertain the idea is leading to increased tensions between Copenhagen and Washington. Following this, there was a phone call between the French and Danish leaders, culminating in France's rather unexpected offer of getting involved militarily in Greenland. On Crux Decode, can France actually send its troops to guard Greenland? Will that not throw its relationship with America under the bus? Can France afford to do this, and that too for Greenland? Is the cost worth it? Have there been instances in the past where France and American governments have collided? And how will this change the dynamics of the longest-running military alliance in history, which is NATO? While France and the United States have long been allies, their relationship has not always been smooth. There have been moments in history when the two nations have found themselves at loggerheads. One of the most notable incidents was during the Iraq War in 2003, when France opposed the US-led invasion. France, in fact, even voted against this invasion in the Security Council. The disagreement strained diplomatic ties between Washington and Paris. Some American officials even went so far as to rename French fries as freedom fries. Earlier, there were tensions, including disagreements over NATO's role and France's decision to withdraw from NATO's integrated military command in 1966 under the then French leader Charles de Gaulle. Despite these differences, direct military confrontation between France and the United States remains highly unlikely. However, France's suggestion of deploying troops to Greenland presents an unprecedented challenge to American foreign policy interests. It could lead to a rare instance of military friction between the two allies. In his first term, Trump had a pretty stormy relationship with Macron. Their first meeting was filled with friction. There were cold vibes during their first ever handshake, with each man trying to prove who was more alpha than the other. Macron wanted to be seen as standing up to the bully that is Trump. But this time is different. Trump's desire to acquire Greenland is not a mere whim. It has deep strategic underpinnings. Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. It is rich in untapped natural resources, including rare earth minerals as well as oil and gas. The Arctic region is also becoming increasingly important because of climate change, and that is making previously inaccessible shipping routes much more viable. The prospect of controlling new Arctic shipping lanes, reducing reliance on traditional global shipping routes, and securing valuable mineral deposits makes Greenland an enticing prospect for America. In fact, Trump's elder son, Don Jr., was in Greenland recently to press America's case there. Beyond economic interests, Greenland holds military significance too. The United States already maintains the Thule Air Base in Greenland, which is a key component of its early missile warning system. Acquiring Greenland would give the United States unparalleled strategic dominance in the Arctic. It would allow America to counter growing Russian and Chinese influence in the region. In fact, Russia and China had back in November signed a joint agreement to explore new shipping lanes in the Arctic. Now, one of the central questions surrounding this controversy is whether Trump's threats are serious or is it just bluster. While Trump has a history of making bold and unconventional statements, outright military action against Greenland would be unprecedented. The US has traditionally used diplomatic and economic means to achieve its strategic goals. An outright invasion of Greenland would be a dramatic departure from traditional American foreign policy. But Trump has been all about disrupting the status quo. Trump's threats to Denmark and Greenland largely appear to be rhetorical rather than actual military planning. The US has a strong alliance with Denmark through NATO. Any military move against Greenland would severely undermine that relationship. Moreover, it would provoke global condemnation and could lead to severe diplomatic and economic repercussions. That said, Trump's rhetoric cannot be entirely dismissed as bluster. His administration's focus on the Arctic reflects a broader shift in America's strategic priorities. In fact, back in 2019, in Trump's first term, the US Department of Defense had released an Arctic strategy outlining plans to enhance America's military presence in Greenland. While this does not mean an outright military takeover of Greenland, it does signal growing American interests in the Arctic. It's also testimony to Trump's transactional approach when it comes to foreign policy. Despite Trump's threats, a military takeover of Greenland remains highly unlikely. Any US action against Greenland would trigger a severe diplomatic crisis, and it would likely lead to sanctions or retaliatory actions by European allies. While the US military is far superior to any potential opposition in Greenland, the political and strategic costs of such an invasion would far outweigh any benefits. It is more likely that Trump and his surrogates will make the case that ordinary Greenlanders themselves want to move out of Denmark's embrace and they want independence. Trump could even push for an independence referendum in Greenland and hope that a majority of Greenlanders would want to separate from Denmark. Denmark, while not a military superpower, is backed by NATO. An attack on Greenland could invoke NATO's Article 5, which considers an attack on one as an attack on all. This would force European allies, including France, to respond militarily, leading to a major geopolitical crisis. The notion of French and American troops clashing in Greenland remains largely hypothetical. France's suggestion of sending troops to Greenland can be interpreted as a political statement rather than a military one. However, if France were to deploy forces in defiance of US interests, it could lead to an unprecedented and heightened tension. A direct military conflict between two NATO members would be almost unthinkable. It would unravel decades of alliance building. However, if tensions were to escalate, then diplomatic and economic retaliation could replace direct military confrontation. France might push for sanctions against America, or European nations could even take a more confrontational stand when it comes to Arctic affairs. It will also most certainly have down-the-line consequences for NATO cooperation in the war in Ukraine, and that is something which can be exploited by Vladimir Putin. If a major crisis were to emerge over Greenland, it could have far-reaching consequences for NATO and its transatlantic relations. The alliance, which already has faced strain over defense spending, particularly when it comes to the Ukraine war, could be pushed to the breaking point if a war were to break out in Greenland. Any American move against Greenland could lead to a loss of trust among its European allies, prompting them to seek greater military autonomy from the United States. This could accelerate discussions about a European defense force which is independent of NATO. They would want to then reduce America's influence over European security affairs. That, if it comes to pass, would be a fundamental reset of the longest-running military alliance in history. It will also be a fundamental reshaping of the post-World War II security architecture.